Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at an incredibly powerful team in the Master League Premier Cup. Now, this team was actually a team that I used to hit Legend the last time Master Premier was out 1 year ago. I wanted to test it out and see if it still held up. And I started off winning my first 8 games with the team, so I think it's fair to say the team holds up incredibly well, even with all the changes to the meta. The team features a Magnezone and Dragon Breath Gyarados core, with the X Factor, Waterfall Primarina, the Core Breaker as the safe switch. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and let's check out the team in action. We've got a Nightmare lead in the first match, Magnezone into Excadrill. I'm going to save switch into Waterfall Primarina. Opponent stays into Drill Run, taking quite a lot of damage in the meantime, and now they send in Golisopod. But this is honestly not a terrible spot to be. I have a pretty decent energy head start. My opponent will go for the liquidation. I can tank that very comfortably, build up to the Moonblast, and bait with the Disarming Voice. My opponent is going to shield up the bait. One thing I do want to note is I am running a 14-15-15 Primarina, but I am running it best buddied to try and overcome the fact that I do have not 15 attack. Here, I'm barely able to survive liquidation number 2, and the Moonblast picks up the KO as I'm able to win switch. So Primarina taking a shield and 1.5 Pokemon with it, and now I have the alignment that I'm looking for. I can align the Gyarados onto the Excadrill. Exca will fire off its Rock Slide right away. I'm going to be committing the shield. We'll have to see what's in back, and it's Goldengo. I'm going to be sending in the Magnezone. Magnezone farming up energy. I only saw 6 hexes. It is 7 to the Focus Blast, so I let it through, but it's a Focus Blast. Oh no, this is an absolute disaster now. I'm going to fire off the Crunch into Goldengo. Goldengo is going to no shield. They will be able to make it to a Shadow Ball, and I'm going to have to commit the shield. I somehow missed the Hex in there. That's really not ideal. I'm going to get a full farm down, and I actually think I still win this. Exca was 5 off, and now they're 1 off here. I'm 1 away, so this game is a win, as even if this is shielded, I can outpace by 1 singular turn. The Aqua Tail does get no shielded, and despite somehow missing a Hex and no shielding a Focus Blast, we take the win. We're right back where we started in the next match, leading Magnezone into another Excadrill. I save switch into the Waterfall Primarina. Opponent sends in Florges. They fire off a move, but they give me a Waterfall for free. The Moonblast connects, and they get the 10% chance at a debuff. Oh, that is so rough. I'm going to fire off the Disarming Voice bait. I'm still able to grab a shield, but debuffed, I really don't have confidence in my potential to flip this matchup, so I am just going to let this go and instead go for a ton of farm on Magnezone. I should be able to farm up to like 100 on Magnezone, and that way I can potentially go for a Wild Charge into the Excadrill to put it into Aqua Tail range. But disaster strikes, they get another 10% chance attack drop twice in a match. I go for the Mirror Shot, and I'm just looking to switch out, sending in the Gyarados. They have their own Gyarados in the back, and this does look winnable. I will fire off the Crunch, putting pressure on that final shield of my opponent. They're going to no shield, and there's a little bit of luck. It finally goes my way. I get the Crunch debuff. I commit the shield. I get baited with the Aqua Tail, but even so, this should just be a win, because a Crunch does not knock out here. It will get me deep into the red, but considering I'm a flying type, they're going to have an absolute nightmare of a time trying to mud shot down the Gyarados from this health range. So I can go for the Aqua Tail. I'm going to be able to make it to another Aqua Tail, and then Magnezone gets some revenge. Magnezone, seeing all the hard counter leads, says not today. We're going to be able to knock out the Excadrill with a Wild Charge from a Magnezone and take the win. Magnezone finally able to catch a breather as it leads into a good lead, leading into Florges. Opponent safe switches into Dragonite, and I'm going to respond with Gyarados. Realistically, I should have stayed in and Wild Charged before switching out, but instead, I end up sending in the Gyarados. Now, typically, this would not be a problem, as I can survive a Dragon Claw, shield the second, and farm down, but they're running Hurricane of all things, and that is really not ideal for me. The good news is since they don't have Superpower, I can no-shield the Dragon Claw, and I have a ton of energy, and they have an Annihilate in the back, but still, I was not prepared for the Hurricane there. Yikes. And now I've lost switch advantage, so Primarina is going to need to put in a lot of work in this endgame. Florges does need 2 charge attacks to KO. Typically, the most efficient route is going to be just going for 4 Disarming Voices, because if you're going to need 2 moves anyway, you may as well go for the cheaper move. So my opponent is going to make the right play here, going for the Disarming Voice. I'm going to Disarming Voice bait myself, and I am able to get the shield. Opponent is going to be firing off another charge attack. I'm going to commit the shield. This time they go for a Moonblast, potentially fishing for that debuff. I mean, a Disarming Voice definitely would have KO'd, but at this point, with how many times I've been debuffed by Moonblast, I would not be surprised to have that happen. And now, I think if I save a shield for Magnezone and I play this carefully, I can win this game. I'm going to farm up energy with the Magnezone. In comes Annihilate, and I'm able to click the Wild Charge. Wild Charge will KO the Annihilate. And now, all that's left is the Florges. Florges has no way past the one remaining shield on the Magnezone. So we lost Switch in the mid-game. Things looked very bleak, but we're able to fight back and take the win. Magnezone now feasting on the leads as I lead into a Gyarados. Opponent safe switches into Goldengo, and I genuinely don't have an amazing response to this. I'm just going to stand with the Magnezone for now and just launch a Wild Charge. Opponent will commit the shield, but Goldengo is a bit uncomfortable. I could send in Gyarados, but my Dragon Breath, of course, is resisted, and it's not the most comfortable matchup ever for Gyarados, so I'm just going to stand with the Magnezone and play this out. The Wild Charge gets no shielded. I'm going to save the Magnezone, send in the Primarina. I was looking for the Waterfall Snipe, but Goldengo, too tanky, surviving on 1 HP and dealing massive damage with a Shadow Ball. Opponent will be able to send back in Gyarados, and now I get to learn that this is a Waterfall Gyarados. Gyarados looking for a potential farm down. I'm going to get to a Moonblast, and Moonblast will do some very significant damage to the Gyarados. Gyarados is going to no shield. Gyarados gets a full farm down. They're only going to get one move off versus Magnezone, which is quite nice for me. So I can just send in the Magnezone. Opponent is going to switch. In the back, it's Dragonite, and here I can just Wild Charge and dip. I click the Mirror Shot. This is just a misplay. I should always go for the Wild Charge, because in this case, my opponent calls the bait, but I end up getting the Mirror Shot debuff. So definitely not a great play to go for the Mirror Shot, but it ends up working out, as even though they call it, I do actually get the Mirror Shot debuff. And now I can just go straight Aqua Tail in this matchup. So Aqua Tail, not going to do a ton of damage. I actually get a double CMP tie there, so I don't get the Dragon Breath through, but it's not going to matter. I'm going to get a farm down, and now they just have no way to win this with the Waterfall Gyarados. Waterfall Gyarados, I can just let this through because I know that I'm not in a range where one Waterfall will KO, so I can just shield up their charge attack. The Volt Switch will register and KO. So unfortunate for my opponent. They were running very weak to Magnezone. They were able to fight back quite well, though. We see a very interesting lead in the next match, leading Magnezone into a purified Tyranitar. Tyranitar, not a Pokemon, honestly, I was expecting to see a whole lot of, but it's on the lead, so I'm going to have to deal with it. I go for a Mirror Shot, I get a shield, and I get another attack drop. I am going to start shielding. My opponent does have Crunch instead of Brutal Swing, and now I'm going to go for the harder hitting Wild Charge. Wild Charge is only neutral, but I'm going to need some harder hitting damage if I want to get rid of Tyranitar. Tyranitar going to be able to grab the final shield with a second Crunch. I do want to overfarm just a little bit more and then go for the Wild Charge. I'm heavily debuffed, but I do have residual energy, and I can pivot out if that is needed. What are they going to send in here? They send in Metagross. I'm going to pivot, sending in the Gyarados. They have Shadow Mamoswine in the back, and before Mamoswine is able to make it to a move, I fire off the Aqua Tail. Aqua Tail gets them low. Mamoswine firing off energy. If this is an Avalanche, I can tank it no problem, and it is going to be the Avalanche, and I will be able to get a farm down as well. In comes the Metagross, and Gyarados barely able to hang on, make it into the Crunch. Crunch will do some significant damage, and at this point, I have a pretty straightforward win con. I can send in the Primarina. The Waterfall fast move pressure will force them to throw a move, because they're not going to be able to farm me down, and then once they throw their energy, I can just combo back into the Magnezone, one Volt Switch to the Wild Charge, and that's going to be good night to the Metagross, and that's going to secure our 5-0 set. We move to the next set, leading Magnezone into Florges. After seeing those terrible Excadrill leads to start, the lead luck has definitely gotten a lot better. Here, I definitely make a misplay. They save switch into Annihilate. I decide to stay in and Wild Charge. This is a pretty risky play because they could just go for a Night Slash, and then I'd be stuck in here with decent switch timers and having to take quite a bit of damage. I should have just gone into the Gyarados instantly, and it turns out they actually have Ice Punch. And I'm going to throw this Aqua Tail right before they can make a Shadow Ball because I just really don't want to take any more damage onto the Gyarados than I have to. Back in comes the Florges. Florges in a bit of an interesting spot here. I'm not in Disarming Voice range yet. They can overfarm as much as they'd like, but I mean, Gyarados is able to output some pretty consistent damage with the Aqua Tails. They will go for the Disarming Voice. That's not going to KO, and that puts them into a very uncomfortable health range. where if they try and Fairy Wind down, Fairy Wind is not known for its damage. It's known for its energy generation, and Gyarados refusing to get KO'd, using every bit of that perfect HP stat and being able to get the Florges deep into the red. I'm going to tank one. I think that this Volt Switch will be enough to KO. It turns out they do survive it on 1 HP, so I decided to shield since I still don't know what they have in the back. We'll have to see, and in the back, it's a Waterfall Gyarados, and this game is over. This is a very safe bait. Whether they shield or not, I still have a win condition. They end up shielding. I can save the Magnezone with an ability to make a Wild Charge later because I'm not in a range where one Waterfall will KO. So my opponent basically has to think of their final shield as already being accounted for, because if they don't shield the Wild Charge, they're getting KO'd. So I have a guaranteed win condition here by just firing off my charge attack with the Primarina because my opponent can't afford to shield. And they know that, so they are just going to let that through, understanding that, I mean, they just don't have a win con. We've got another Florges lead in the next match. Magnezone, I mean, the redemption arc in terms of leads has been incredible. They save switch Goodra, and I'm going to respond with my Gyarados. I didn't want to send in the Primarina in case they had Power Whip, but I am actually going to shield here in case they have Draco Meteor. They could run a variety of movesets. Turns out they actually are running Power Whip, and I go for the Aqua Tail, and it looks like that was Charge Attack Priority Tie. And the Aqua Tail does barely KO the Goodra. Back in comes Florges. And again, we're in one of these situations where they can overfarm as much as they'd like on Florges. They can absolutely be my guest. Overfarm as much as they'd like, but that energy doesn't really go anywhere into the Magnezone. So I'm more than happy to let this through. Florges will go for the Disarming Voice that picks up the knockout, but I can just send back in the Magnezone. I have a lot of energy available on the Magnezone. They're definitely not in a range where I can Mirror Shot for the KO. Wild Charge would KO though. So I was thinking of doubling up. In hindsight, I probably should have just Wild Charged right before that, as now I'm a little bit low on HP, which could be a bit problematic. The Wild Charge will KO in the back. Oh, it's just another Gyarados. Okay, so we are very, very good here. Gyarados, extremely common, so having two Pokemon that basically hard counter Gyarados with the Waterfall Primarina and the Magnezone, and then having your own Gyarados ends up working out pretty nicely, because a lot of teams, like that Florges Gyarados core is just absolutely everywhere. Again, they can't afford to shield the move, so I can just full send the Moonblast, because if they shield it, they're just getting Wild Charged. So Primarina is going to get the farm down, and we're able to take the win. Win streak now up to 7. Let's see if we can make it 8, leading Magnezone into Dragonite. This is technically a lost lead for Magnezone, but I'm just going to go for Wild Charge and dip. This does a ton of damage, or grabs an early shield. Opponent's going to let that through. I can send in the Gyarados, and my opponent will send out Florges. So now we're seeing Gyarados in less than favorable alignment. Florges, of course, not a terrific matchup for Dragon Breath Gyarados, but honestly, baiting out the Florges isn't the worst thing in the world, as Florges, with that Fairy Wind Disarming Voice spam, is not the most comfortable matchup ever for the Primarina, so baiting it out, definitely not too bad, and I can use it as an opportunity to get some energy on the Magnezone. My opponent, not going to let me make a third Aqua Tail. I was hoping they'd get greedy, but no, they're not going to let that happen. They're going to pick up the KO with the Disarming Voice. I'm going to send back in the Magnezone and just look to farm energy. My opponent can fire off the Moonblast. I'm more than happy to absorb this damage. That's, of course, going to do way less than a potential superpower. I can farm up to a Mirror Shot plus a Wild Charge. Mirror Shot would come close to KOing the Dragonite. I'm going to Wild Charge. They have to go for a superpower here on Charge Attack Priority, but they don't end up throwing. I don't know if they got one turn bring in or if they just decided not to throw. I send in the Primarina. In the back, it's Metagross. Up a shield, Waterfall Primarina does actually win this. Opponent is going to resign the match. Hopping into the final match, we have the Excadrill lead returning once again. I save switch into the Primarina. Opponent stays in here, and they fire off a Drill Run. I decide to let this go. In hindsight, I think I should have shielded, because if they're staying in to throw, they're probably very, very weak, and they are. Right on cue, they send in Gyarados. So the opponent was core broken by the Primarina, but unfortunately, I didn't protect it. I didn't use the shield. So now this gets a little bit uncomfortable. They're going to fire off some energy. Very okay. I'm just going to let that through. Fully wait the timer, and then I'm going to get the farm down with Magnezone. Unfortunately, my switch clock not yet up, so I'm going to fire off the Wild Charge. Wild Charge, it's double resisted, but it will do a little bit of damage into the Excadrill, and now I can send in Gyarados. I'm going to shield up the Rock Slide and try and commit to a farm down. My opponent, their clock, I don't think it's quite up yet, but they're able to make another move, and I decide to double shield. I decide to double shield. In the back, it's Dragonite. They were triple weak to the Primarina. If I had just shielded the Primarina, I could have been in a much better spot. This Dragonite is incredibly scary in the end game, but the good news for me is that switch clocks are misaligned. I have to stall out the timer and send in the Magnezone because the threat of a potential Wild Charge can force them to superpower and lower their defense. The Aqua Tail gets the shield, in comes the Magnezone. Magnezone not going to get a move. They go for the superpower. This will KO, and now it's going to be a race. Dragon Breath versus Dragon Breath. I make the Aqua Tail. The question is, how much HP does the Excadrill have? Aqua Tail KOs. It's Dragon Breath versus Mud Shot. The Excadrill survives on 1 HP, and unfortunately, that's how our win streak comes to an end. All in all, I think this team has held up incredibly well. Waterfall Primarina is an absolute menace. And outside of the games where it was stuck against the Excadrills, Magnezone is a very nice core breaker as well. A lot of people really like the Florges plus Gyarados core, and that core just gets completely folded by Magnezone. So if you do have a Magnezone and you're wanting to build a team around it, I think this is a very, very strong team. The Waterfall Primarina ends up being a very nice kind of generalist. Like even against typical matchups that would be horrible for it, like the Metagross with Waterfall, it still has some neutral play. So overall, I feel like the team held up a lot better than I was expecting. As I mentioned, starting off a team with an 8-game win streak, we will absolutely take. And the game where we lost it was an absolute heartbreaker as well. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support guys provide is sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.